2026 marks 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the creation of a new nation dedicated to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. America's faced many challenges and changes over the past 250 years, and it gives each generation a great story to tell and a rich history to explore. Here in Caldwell County, we have that same rich history and great stories to tell. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to tell you some of the history of Caldwell County and hear from many of our residents who have great stories to tell. Joining me today is local historian John Hawkins. John, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I know there's a million things I could ask you and you could answer history-wise for Caldwell County, but today we're going to focus on Buffalo.
Okay, Buffalo Cove.
Buffalo Cove. So, first of all, I'm going to ask you again, how did you get interested in documenting history? Well,
I've always been interested in history, and I've always wondered about how my family fit into things. But since we were just common, ordinary people, I thought, nothing. Mm-hmm. But in 1976, when the bicentennial of the nation came along, and then a couple of years later, the miniseries Roots, if you remember it, I think those two things did a lot to make us wonder what did our families have to do with the founding of the nation and what went on and what was our part. And genealogy became a hobby about that time for a lot of people. My dad could sit and talk to you hours on end about who was related to whom, things that he had heard, and he remembered everything he heard, I think. And I would hear him tell those things, and people were coming in asking him questions. And I realized that if we weren't careful, when he was gone, that was going to be gone. So I started trying to document lots of that. And that's where I got my start, really, my first information. But there's not a day that passes yet that I don't remember that there's something I could ask my dad that he could tell me if he were here to do it.
Okay, you have written a book on Buffalo Cove.
Well, go ahead.
Call it a book. I mean, I've read it. There's a lot of information in there.
Well, I think book may be a little bit of a stretch. It's not a researched history as it should be. It's really things, again, that I heard people say that I wanted to document so they would not be lost. Now, there is some research, things that I learned when doing family history. I'm related to every family that was in Buffalo Cove in the early days. I'm descended from every one of them. And so I learned things about them, and I learned about the community that way also. And so that's basically what it is. And one of my goals was if I would document it, that perhaps somebody, when they read it, would, hey, I remember so-and-so, that they could add to it. And that happened a couple of times too.
Well, let's talk about the early days of Buffalo Cove.
Okay.
What was it like back in those early days, first settlements?
Now, I wasn't there, Paige.
Well, I know you weren't there. Now, John, I know you weren't there, but you've got some documentation on that.
Well, it was a typical rural community as things were in those days, and there were no settlers, and the first ones who came in, were pioneers, and they had to pave the way and create a community and whatever. The earliest settler that I have documentation of was, I think in the late 1770s, a man named Richard Churchill. And I've always wondered, is he related to Winston Churchill, part of the same family? Of course, Winston Churchill was in England. We were in the New World, but it could be the same family.
Could be.
But anyway, I don't know anything about him other than the fact that he had some property there. And he's turned that property over, basically sold it to Mr. Cottrell, I can't remember his first name. And the Cottrells were really the first family that settled in Buffalo Cove. And I know the area where they settled. And so they created a community. Their other families came, followed them, generally relatives. The Curtises in the Richland section were related to the Cottrells, and they came in, and Campbell family came in, and 3 or 4 families. As late as the Civil War, there was something like 50 people in Buffalo Cove. And they were basically 3 or 4 families who had intermarried with each other by that time. And they were the earliest ones in Buffalo Cove. And they were farmers, pretty
That's
much.
what I was going to ask. I imagine that they were farmers living off the land.
Yes. When Caldwell County was formed in 1841, the second meeting of the county, what would be now the county commissioners, I've forgotten what they were called in that day, divided the entire county in school districts. There were 31 school districts covering all of what is now Caldwell County. And one of those districts was in the Buffalo Cove section, and they had appointed 3 committeemen, and then there was a couple of teachers mentioned. So there was apparently a school in Buffalo Cove, perhaps even before the county was formed. There were settlers there before the county was formed. So perhaps there was a school there. And of course it would have been a little one-room school, basically, grades 1 through 7 at most. And whatever they taught in those days, reading, writing, arithmetic, I'm sure, and that was it. And then, and now the school did stay there. I went my first 2 years at Buffalo Cove School. I made 3 grades in 1 year. The teacher said I was so busy he had to give me extra work, so I made 2 grades in 1 year, which is something I don't think they would allow anymore. But I did that, and so that was in 1946 that I started to school. The first year that I was there that I made the 2 grades, they kept telling us, now you're going to be consolidated with Happy Valley within the next year. And so at the end of that first year, we left that not knowing whether we were going to be going to Buffalo Cove or Happy Valley the next year. It turned out that grades 4 through 7 did go to Happy Valley, but grades 1 through 3 stayed in Buffalo Cove. So I stayed in Buffalo Cove 1 more year. So I had a little bit of experience with the 2-room school, which is just a little bit more than a 1-room school. But that was pretty much it as far as schools go. From then on, they went to Happy Valley. I graduated from Happy Valley School. And of course, later on, Happy Valley consolidated with to make High Brighton. And that's where the Buffalo Cove people now go to high school as High Brighton.
But I imagine for you as a child, that was quite the transition from going to your community school to going, I mean, now we don't think of Happy Valley as being a much larger school, but it would have been. Well,
we got to Happy Valley, and I was in the 4th grade. They had 3 4th grade rooms there in Happy Valley at that time. And I'd been used to being in a room where there were 3 grades 1 through 3. We didn't have a cafeteria at Buffalo Cove. We didn't have a library. We didn't have a lot of things that had Valley. Yes, it was going from a small town to a big city, you know.
Let's talk about church and worship and the churches in the Buffalo Cove community.
Okay, there are 2 churches basically in Buffalo Cove in the early days. The oldest one is the Buffalo Cove Baptist Church. It was formed in 1851. It is still an active congregation. At one time, there was Buffalo Cove Advent Christian Church, and the families, that was 1 or 2 families, and they moved out of Buffalo, so that church basically disbanded in later years. But the building was still being used, and I'm not sure whether is still being used now or not by an interdenominational group. But it was never very large. But as I say, I'm not sure where that is still an active congregation or not. But the Buffalo Cove Baptist Church is still an active congregation.
And the Buffalo, I mean, when you talk about active congregation, they were a very active congregation. I remember from reading what you've written that they formed a community center at one point.
A community center, community organization, yes. I can't remember exactly. That was in the 60s. In the 60s, and I was away from here in the Air Force during that time, so I don't remember a whole lot firsthand about it, just from what I heard as I would come home on leave and to hear people talk about in later years. But they won some awards, they did some things, and again, as with so many organizations like that, they kind of die out. And it's a shame that they do sometimes, but I don't know what causes them to die, but they do.
Yes. And there's a park now. Is there a park on that property now?
There is a park on the property where the community center was. Since Helene, it has been closed. But I don't think it looks like it could still be used when I pass there, and I've got a feeling it will be reopened at some future point. After
the Great Depression, you had some of the CCC camps, one CCC camp in Buffalo Cove, and I know you have, or I believe you have, a personal connection to at least that property.
Yeah. Well, of course, the CCC was formed in the nation to bring us out of the Great Depression. And yes, it was formed, I think, in the late 30s. And the property belonged to my grandfather Hawkins, and they leased it from him. And I have another connection too, living right next door to me, and the house right next door at that time was the camp doctor. And his daughter and my mother became very good friends. And they stayed in contact for a number of years, even after they moved away. But as far as knowing a whole lot about that camp, I don't know. I know that the community could be involved in some of the activities, like they had a movie night, and people could go to the movies that night if they wanted to. The doctor would also treat people in the community if they got sick, things like that. So, and they were, I think their main goal at that time was to roads, and they laid some of the road beds that are still being used for the basis for the roads in Buffalo Cove now. And another story that is tied in with them, the 1940 flood. Nina Todd was the one person from Caldwell County, from Buffalo Cove, who was drowned. She was visiting with relatives in Watauga, or she probably would not have been drowned. But anyway, she was drowned, and the CCC camp boys went to look for her body. Her body was not found, I think, for about a week. And they went to look for her body, and they were not the ones who found it, but they were a part of that. And they did a lot of things to help bring recovery from the 1940 flood.
Yeah, they really integrated with the community.
I think that was part of their mission statement, to integrate with the community. Some of the guys met girls and married them in Buffalo Cove, and I've heard that other places, the camps where they meet local girls and marry them.
Well, you know, that's...
Romance happens.
Romance happens.
And Cupid needs a little bit of help sometimes. He has to bring people together.
That's right, and that would be a good way to get people here, because there were, as I remember, there were hundreds, there were a lot of men there working. Maybe not hundreds, but there were...
I think I've heard around 200.
Okay. So it was, and from your book, I remember these men had room and board, they were, fed, and they got paid. They got
a little bit of a salary, they got room and board. I don't know what else they got. And of course, the CC camps disbanded when World War II occurred. After Pearl Harbor, the men were needed somewhere else, so they disbanded those camps, and most of them went into the military.
Again, that whole, unfortunate way of reviving the nation.
Yeah.
And still, in Buffalo Cove, most of the families, it was a farming community.
Well, and some lumber business there at one time, yes. I know very little about the lumber business, but I do know people came there and lived briefly to get the timber. And then when the timber ran out, they went on to the next community, which is typical of work like that.
Right. What am I missing about Buffalo Cove? I feel like there's a lot.
Well, if you want, you're going to have to move there.
I'm going to have to move there. Well, secretly, I have looked at some houses in that area.
Well, there are a few houses available right now, but no, I don't know. When you say what are you missing, I don't know how to answer that exactly. Now, I can tell you, now when I was growing up, everybody knew everybody else. You could go knock on anybody's door, they'd invite you in. And we just knew everybody. And if something happened, if there's a death in the community, everybody was there to support. If there was sickness and help was needed, everybody was there to support. My generation basically left Buffalo Cove. My peers who were my age, a lot of them did not stay in Buffalo Cove. They moved. Some of them came into the town of Lenore, others with other states, other towns all over. And so there are very few people there now who grew up with me. And so that when our parents' generation started dying out, and our generation started inheriting their property, those who were not living here had no interest in staying there, so they sold their property to what we call outsiders. And there's some very nice people who have moved in, but there's not that same sense of community that there was when I was growing up. I don't mean that these people are bad people, but we don't visit with each other like we did in those days. When I was growing up too, you were home on Sunday afternoon, you never knew who was coming to visit you, which one of your neighbors was going to be coming or who you were going to go visit that Sunday afternoon.
Well, and you said earlier, a lot in the very early days, people intermarried, so...
Yes.
And I imagine with your parents' generation, a lot of the people who lived, were your neighbors, were your relatives.
Yes. Well, that's true. A good point, too, there, particularly in those earlier days that we talked about. And there was no transportation. If you married your neighbor because you couldn't get out of the immediate area to meet anybody else. And if they weren't your relative in this generation, they were in the next generation. So it was nothing unusual for cousins to marry. And they did not seem to look down. We kind of stick our nose up now about marrying your cousin. But it didn't seem to bother them. When I was teaching, I was explaining to my students one day about Edgar Allan Poe marrying his first cousin. And somebody raised the question, said, well, doesn't that mean that their children were either deformed or retarded or something like that? And of course, Edgar Allan Poe and his wife did not have any children, so we don't know what would have happened there.
Right.
But one student explained to me something that has made sense. Now, I'm not a science person, but I do remember recessive genes and those things that you learned in biology class. And this student explained to me, he said, if there is a tendency in your family toward brilliance, and you married your first cousin, that would double the chance of your children being brilliant. But if there was a tendency toward retardation or deformity or something like that, that would double the chance of your children being retarded or deformed. And that makes sense to me.
That makes sense to me.
So, but there were, and I do know that out of some of these marriages of cousins did come some extremely smart people, very intelligent people.
Talk to me a little, you've done a lot of genealogy work and you know families. Just talk to me about your own genealogy work and the interrelation between so many families and last names, because I think people will find it interesting to know all that you have learned. Well, we don't have time for all that you have learned because that would be hours and hours worth, but those connections.
Okay. Well, of course, my name is Hawkins, and so that was the family that I really started out first, but we did not have a whole lot of success with that one first. My grandmother Hawkins was a Pipes, P-I-P-E-S. That is a fairly rare name. And it turned out that all the Pipes in this immediate area are kin sooner or later, and I had more success. That was the first success I had with doing genealogy, and so I learned quite a bit about them and could go back into the 1700s with them fairly easily. My mother was not from Caldwell County. She was from Watauga County, and her maiden name was Green, which I think gives you a little bit of connection. You're kin to me whether you want to be or not.
Yeah, we're cousins somewhere
along the way. My mother was a Green from up there, and of course that's one of the most common names up there. They used to say if you walked down the street of Boone and met a man you didn't know, call him Mr. Green, and you had about a 99% chance of being right.
And I would say in the end of Caldwell County, if you call him Mr. Green, your chances may not be 99% anymore, but they're still pretty high.
Yeah. And if he's not a Green, his mother was.
His mother, exactly.
Like my mother was a Green. And I love to tell about how my mother got to Caldwell County, which is not exactly what you've asked me. But the Todd store in Buffalo Cove that we haven't talked about yet, I don't think.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah, we do need to. But Mrs. Todd was my mother's aunt. Miss Todd was a sister to my grandmother. And Mrs. Todd had 4 children in 5 years, which is a lot of kids, you know, there. My mother came here in 1930 to help Mrs. Todd with her 4 children, who were basically 4 babies, and met my dad, who had grown up in Buffalo Cove, and they didn't get married for 5 years. I've never figured out which one was hardest to catch, whether she was hard to catch or he was, but they were married about 5 years later. And my mother stayed here the rest of her life, of course. And so and I wasn't born for 5 years after they were married. So, but anyway, that's how my mom got here from Watauga. And of course, I visited with my Green relatives up there many, many times, and really knew them in a lot of ways better than I did my Hawkins relatives, who were right around me. But anyway, that's another story, I guess. And then back to John, I was related to the Robinses who were up there, the Days who were there. Oh gosh, who else? Is somebody in the book? The earliest settlers in the book. The Thomas Day family, Lansdowns. I'm related to all those in some way or another, at one point or another. And even the Cottrells, I do have a connection with.
So really, and I think if we all look back and do some genealogy, we'll be maybe a little surprised at all of our connections.
And someone has said to me, if we are not interested in where we come from, we're probably not interested in where we're going. And I don't know whether I quite agree with that or not, but I think there is a curiosity. We all would like to kind of know where we came from. But a lot of us don't want to do the work that it takes to find out, or maybe don't know how to do the work. And I've helped a lot of people do genealogy for their family. And I will do it again, since this might be a good way to plug, maybe do a commercial. I will help people if they are interested.
But you got to dedicate some time to it.
Yes. And you have to be, and you won't find it out overnight. And I'll tell you one more thing. If family history, if scandal in your family embarrasses you, don't start, because you'll find it in your family sooner or later. Family has it sooner or later.
I had a family member start doing genealogy and quit suddenly. And she would never tell anyone why she quit. So there's a scandal somewhere in my family.
You better find out what that is.
I probably need to. Let's talk about Todd's store.
Okay, Mr. and Ms. Todd came from Watauga County. I think in 1924. They'd only been married a couple of years, and they bought the store, previously existing store that I can't tell you anything at all about. But they bought that store, and Mr. Todd, they ran that store as long as Mr. Todd lived. He died sometime in the 1980s. His daughter, Mary, who married Herb Miller, the two of them ran the store for a few years. And when they started running it, they added a sandwich counter, which was very popular. And then after they decided to fully retire, some other people did, a couple of other people had it for a little while. And then I guess, I don't remember how many years ago, probably 2014, somewhere about, Tom Kasab from South Carolina bought the store. redid it, made it into a restaurant, and changed the name to Buffalo Mercantile. And it went on for a few years and closed. But it has just reopened just this week. They're open right now with a limited menu, and they plan to be open with a full menu within the next week or so, hopefully. And right now they're open Tuesday through Saturday. I don't know whether they're going to change those days or not, but I'm sure if you look at Facebook or call them, they'll be glad to tell you anything. But it's back up and running, and an addition to the community. So we've got a story again.
That's wonderful. Let's also talk about the 1940 flood and its impact on Buffalo Cove.
Okay. Of course, the worst part of the 40 flood was in Watauga rather than Caldwell. Mm-hmm. But Buffalo Cove did have a connection with it. The Todds that I mentioned, their daughter, the oldest daughter, Nina, was visiting with relatives up in Watauga County. And while she was there, she was knocked off of a porch and drowned. And she was as far as I know, the only person in Caldwell County to lose her life in the flood. But she was, as I say, connected with Buffalo Cove, but visiting up there at that time. Her body was not found for a week, and it was the CCC camp people that went out and looked for it. They were not the ones who found her body. A little boy down in Wilkes County found her body in the Ferguson area. He had gone all the way from Deep Gap to Ferguson area, and so the little boy found her body when he was out playing. But that was Buffalo's connection with it. Now, some of the people tell stories about, and Mr. and Ms. Todd would tell stories about, they lived next door to the store, which was across the road from the Buffalo Cove Church. Mm-hmm. And they left their house that night and went into the church because they thought it'd be safer. And Mary Miller tells that they slept in the church that night in the pulpit area. And she was just a little girl. My dad's brother's family, Avery Hawkins' family, came and spent the night with them in the church. And my cousin Edna tells about being there in the pulpit area too, sleeping. Said they were not the least bit afraid. Of course, they were little girls, so they probably didn't realize how serious it was. But anyway, and again, the CCC camp boys did a lot toward restoring that community too. So Buffalo Cove did not have anything major, but I will tell one story about my mother. My mother was at home. Dad had gone to work that day, and Mom said the river kept rising. She could look out the back window and see the creek behind the house getting up in the fields, moving up toward the house. She was there with a little 4-month-old baby, me. And she said, she kept thinking, should I try to leave? But it was pouring the rain. She could not leave, go anywhere. And if she'd had to go anywhere, she'd had to walk, and it had been in pouring rain. Mm-hmm. And but anyway, Dad and some friends of his, they were riding together home from work. They got to a place they could not get across the river, so they had to stop. And after stopping for a little while, he and 2 more men decided they were going to swim across the creek and come home. They left their wallets, their watches, any valuables they had with a man who lived there, and swam across the creek and walked Dad would have been 3 miles to home. My mom said she'd never been so glad to see anybody in her life as to see him come home. She didn't know whether he was going to get there, whether he was safe or what, you know. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard him tell that story many times. I kind of lived through another version of it with Helene. I was without power for 11 days. So I kind of got a little idea of what I think they went through.
Yeah, I mean, Helene was rough. It was rough on our county, our community, and our neighbors. Right.
Helene was our version of the 1940 flood.
Yes, it was. On a happier note, Let's talk about Camp Carrollwood that's there in the Buffalo Cove community.
Okay, Camp Carrollwood was formed, I think, in the 1960s by the Methodist Church. And it was I don't know, they used it for various activities, I'm not sure. And I knew some of the caretakers that were there, but I didn't know a whole lot about the operation of the camp. But it went on for a number of years, and in recent years, it was bought by the Bethel Colony of Mercy, which is here in Lenoir, as a woman's campus. In case people don't know what mission of Bethel Colony is, it's drug and alcohol rehab. For the Bethel Colony is for men, but there are women's campuses out there for women. And it is going strong. I think they have around 20 ladies at the moment and are building up to have more. But it's certainly a good thing. And
it's a wonderful thing.
And we know that Bethel Colony is also a great thing too. And they have expanded with their women's campus. And it's good. I don't see what all's going on there because it's kind of off the main road. But I do see cars going in and out. So I know it's active.
It's active, and I mean, it's been a couple of years, but they came to my church and talked about their work, and it's impressive.
Yes, they have been to our church and talked about their work too. Yes,
impressive.
In fact, the men have come through the years, and now the ladies are coming too.
Yeah, they sang for us, and it was quite the choir. Well, I think we've looked through your book. We've covered the highlights. We have definitely not covered everything that's mentioned.
Are you ready for the quiz now?
No, sir. I never had you as a teacher. I think I was in study hall in your room my freshman year of high school. I just sat in the back.
I remember you being in study hall students, just sat in the back and we were supposed to make you do work, but I knew you. Of course, I knew your family and knew you, and I knew I was not going to have any problems with you. So I pretty well let you do what you wanted to do.
I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I know I was there.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Hawkins, thank you for coming and talking to me today, and I hope you'll come back and we'll do another story time with one of your other books or history projects, because you've researched so much and we need to share those stories.
Be glad to. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.